50 years ago, in 1973, Pat Price walked into the office of his Psi research director, Hal Puthoff, and landed a stack of self-initiated remote viewing sessions on his desk and simply declared, "You might be interested in this." In 1975, Pat died under some very strange circumstances, and his sessions would remain tucked away in Hal's possession until 1977, when he decided to author an article in a small print investigation journal called Pursuit, in which he detailed his psychic research efforts at SRI and casually dropped in the name of 4 alien bases that Pat had found during those rogue remote viewing sessions. Explosive of a claim that may have been, it was a relatively low-stakes risk, as Pursuit was an extremely niche membership-based audience, and with only 1,000 copies of the journal in print at a time, Hal's low-key disclosure went largely unnoted by the public. Come the early 1980s, however, a second generation of psychic spies emerged, this time under the oversight of the military. With a new project manager at the helm, Hal would slide the viewings across the desk of Skip Atwater under exactly the same guise with which they were once given to him. "You might be interested in this." And interest him it certainly did, because this was the spark that lit the fire under Project 8200. Over the next few decades, books and interviews made reference to various details about Pat's off-book sessions, but never in full detail and never with the original documents attached. But in July 2024, that would all change when Skip Atwater released his book, Project 8200, in which he gave the public for the first time 20 original pages from the file. The Pat Price papers were real, and finally we got to see them with our own eyes. And yet, still, over half of the pages were missing. But come November last year, just months after the release of Skip's book, Pat's explosive sessions, 50 years and a transatlantic voyage later, had finally landed in the hands of someone who would allow the public to see every word and every sketch in its entirety. But even now, when we have all 47 pages in our hands, we're still left with more questions than answers.
Able to explain them as hoaxes, erroneously identified friendly aircraft, meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberration.
Fear of ridicule was the foundation on which the cover-up was placed. But I suspect in something which is as unacceptable as a reality as this phenomenon, no piece of physical evidence would satisfy anybody.
I would have liked to, and it was my intention, to start off this video with an introduction to the foundations of the remote viewing program, the main players, Pat's entry into it, his background, the general who, what, where and why Pat's viewings were ever hidden in the first place. And of course, when it comes to Pat, you can't really talk about him without talking about his strange death, and that happened just a year and a half after he'd done these viewings, and only 4 months after he'd gone to work directly for the CIA. But the more I looked into Pat, those around him and his death, the less clear everything became. I thought I knew a fair bit about this era of Psi research, and now I'm questioning a lot of that, and it was beginning to completely derail me from the papers themselves, because every thread I pulled on led to loose end after loose end. And so I'm recording this episode without the context and background that I had intended to, because I am still so thoroughly lodged down that rabbit hole right now that to reduce it down to something just for the sake of an intro segment doesn't quite sit right with me. I want to make sure I've got everything correct first. Pat is just one link in a chain of shadiness that I already knew was murky at best, but the bigger picture is more convoluted and warped than I'd ever really realised. And so it looks like now this is going to turn into a bit of an ongoing series, because I cannot seem to escape all of the connections just constantly jumping out at me, even when I'm reading, watching or listening to something where there on the surface should be no connection at all. I just need to get through these 2 episodes about the papers themselves, compile everything else, so keep a future eye out for all of that, because we'll be going deep on all of this, it seems. And with that spiel out the way, let's get into the Pat Price papers. Our story begins in the early 1970s when two Thetans and a Theosophist were on the lookout for new recruits to test for psychic capacity. And as luck would have it, in April 1972, a third Thetan came knocking at the SRI door with a gift like no other. The Psi Super Squad was assembled. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, the research leads, Ingo Swann and Pat Price, the psychic Scientologists. All they needed was an agnostic doctor to oversee the magic, which the CIA kindly provided by way of Kit Green, and alas, the first remote viewing research team was made manifest. And I can't not mention there was also some guest appearances from a Mossad spoonbender from time to time as well. Pat was initially given simple targets, a swimming pool, a safe, mundane, non-secret stuff, but it wouldn't be long before they hit him with a big one. Hal, Russell and Kit threw a set of coordinates his way. No context, no hints, just numbers. The coordinates were for a summer house of one of Kit's colleagues, a cabin in the woods hidden away in West Virginia Forest Hills. Now, according to Hal Puthoff, Pat produced a 5-page running commentary beginning with a description of the area from an altitude of 1,500 feet. The tour was complete with descriptions of equipment, names from desks, and just to show how serious he was, Pat produced a list of names from folders he'd seen locked away in a secure cabinet. Amongst these names, Price wrote Flytrap, Minerva, Cue Ball, 14 Ball, 8 Ball, and Racker. Hal passed over the session data to Kit, who concludes it's one big miss because Pat had in no way described a cabin in the woods. Except Ingo Swann had also been tasked with the exact same set of coordinates, and he had produced strikingly similar results to Pat. This seemed to intrigue Kit Green enough that he decided he was going to drive to his colleague's cabin the next weekend and take a little look around for himself. And that's when he would find himself confronted with no trespassing signs just a few miles from the cabin and an unknown US government facility. Kit decides to pursue matters further and located an official who might know about the facility in question and shared with him Pat and Ingo's viewing data. Within days, Kit would find himself at the center of an intense and pretty hostile security investigation. Ingo Swann and Pat Price had described in precise and lengthy detail a secret Pentagon facility in the hills of West Virginia, Sugar Grove. The site was in fact a US Navy communications base with large subterranean facilities tucked away into the base of a mountain. Amongst its secret functions was the interception of international phone communications and the control of US spy satellites. Pat Price, with no military or intelligence background, had managed to provide a list of project titles associated with current and past activities, including one of extreme sensitivity, along with the code name of the base that nobody was supposed to know. Pat and Ingo's remote viewings had been accurate enough that the Pentagon was left to assume that some huge criminal leakage of top secret code word clearance information had found its way into SRI. One extensive investigation later, and it was determined that there had been no leak. Ingo and Pat's consciousness had simply tugged them towards something far more interesting than an empty cabin in the woods, and frankly, who can blame them? Certainly not Hal Puthoff or Russell Targ, because this little slip-up would secure the program's funding for another 2 years, and in Hal's own words, fired the shot that was heard all around the Langley base. Over that next year, Pat would be tasked with various mundane and classified targets as the team worked to develop new testing standards and tasking methods. His success rate was undeniable. ESP was real, and it was very much alive and well in Pat Price. His accuracy rate is purported to be 85 to 90%, and as for some of the misses on his record, a good few of them have actually been proven correct later on down the line. It wasn't that he'd recorded something false necessarily, it was more the fact that physical intel had yet to be collected in order to corroborate what he had psychically retrieved with his mind. Now fast forward to September 1973, and Pat decides to do some off-record remote viewing exploration in his own time. From what we're told, this was Pat gone rogue. No one had tasked him with this or suggested that he do these sessions. He just followed where his consciousness led him one night, and that just happened to be right to secret alien bases hidden away inside 4 mountains across the Earth. We've got no date for this initial viewing. The first listed one won't appear until session 2, but we jump straight in on page 1 with him listing all 4 of the mountains and their associated coordinates. Mount Hayes in Alaska, Mount Ziel in Australia, Mount Perdido in the Pyrenees, and Mount Inyangani in Rhodesia. Right off the bat, I just want to know, this is very strange. We see no trace of Pat going through the motions of developing a sense for where his consciousness is leading him. The sounds, smells, shapes, fleshing out the terrain in general. There's just no evidence of gradual perceptual establishment before he's immediately honed in to the main pull, located it, named it, and reeled off all the associated coordinates. We don't see him bilocate himself from country to country, or his mind leading him towards strange anomalies across the globe. It's just boom, hard data inked on the page. I've seen probably hundreds of remote viewing sessions at this point, but never seen that one before, and that raises some questions for me, but I will go into that in part 2, so you've got a chance to get a feel for all of the papers and the sessions first. So now Pat proceeds to give us a little bit more insight on what each of these mysterious bases are for. There seems to be a different function for each 4 of the sites: Pyrenees, main base; Inyangani, main maintenance and tech centre; Hayes, weather and geological control; the Ziel, personnel centre, personnel for all bases; Homo sapien intro point. That seems to be the reason for the better theta detection at Ziel. This area should be approached with caution. In fact, the whole area is under alert right now, so for a time I'm going to look elsewhere. So it's important to note that Pat was a Scientologist, as was Hal Puthoff at the time, so you're going to hear him use a lot of Scientology-based language to conceptualize what he's seeing. And because of that, I'm going to have to provide a bit of translation throughout, starting with right now. So theta is akin to life force, spirit, or thought, and a thetan is an actual spiritual being or soul. So when Pat says he hones in on Mount Ziel and he realizes there's humans there, thetan's a spiritual being, and therefore theta, the life force of that being, is more detectable to him. That's what he means, and they were on high alert, so he skedaddles. Now, if you were thinking that the Earth base's situation was pretty wild, well then Pat goes on to just casually drop in that the home port of these aliens is Mars. No further explanation, just Mars is inhabited, moving on. And so he heads back to Mount Perdido, and this is what Pat says. Primary purpose there is to reinforce BTC implants, transport new recruits, and overall monitoring function. Once again, translation: BTC implants means body thetan cluster implants, which is basically human spirit attachment, but clusters of them, who imprint traumatic memories on the person they attach to. So kind of like a bunch of demons on your back whispering in your ear and you mistakenly think that they're all your own thoughts, that kind of thing. Again, I really wish I didn't have to go here because Xenu was never on my list of things to cover on this channel, but in order for this to further make sense, I am gonna have to give you a very little bit of brief Scientology lore, because Hal, Ingo, and Pat were all OT level Scientologists, and that means they had gone clear, which allows you to pursue to the secret upper tiers, which are the OT ones, which stands for Operating Thetan. Now when you get to OT3, which Hal, Ingo, and Pat had all achieved, you're finally allowed into the deep dark secrets of the universe, and that is when you are told about Xenu. Now, Xenu is a galactic confederacy overlord who 75 million years ago brought billions of other beings to Earth before then killing them by strapping hydrogen bombs to volcanoes. He then captures all the Thetans, which are again souls or spirits, and implanted engrams, which are like traumatic memories, in order to trap them in their bodies. So the body Thetans, BTs, are clustered spirits attached to human bodies, carrying these implants like some sort of viral disruption code. I know. Just stay with me and give Pat the benefit of the doubt, because if you strip away all the Scientology terms and lore and understand that this is just the filter through which he's been able to conceptualize what it is that he's seeing, it is actually still very in line with much of what is said to this day about what these little alien schemers are up to, and that is influencing, infiltrating, abducting, etc, etc. So when he says the primary purpose at Mount Perdido is to reinforce BTC implants, transport of new recruits, and overall monitoring function, just think of it like this. The aliens kidnap people, install and update a psychic implant that force people to obey, spy, and send data without them knowing it. It can induce false memories and can be reactivated or updated whenever they want using sound wave. So what he's basically describing is the age-old abduction narrative we all know so well, but repackaged in L. Ron Hubbard's fantasy language. Alright, with that out of the way, let's find out who's running the show. Personnel, to all appearances, look like blonde Homo sapiens except lung, heart, and eyes. Lung tissue is much coarser than Homo sapien. Heart has added chambers, one on ventral, other on Venus? You'll know. Side for extra compression in and out of Earth atmosphere. Blood is much darker on exposure to air. I note that the eyes have same characteristics of a cat or very similar to them. When viewed obliquely, they have much greater depth of lens. Skin tone has a bluish cast, looks like a human with cancer. They use thought induction transfer, have knowledge of physics, universal flow patterns, can induce instant sleep and hypnotism. By thought transfer, they can motor control humans and direct movement of body to suit requirement. So they are essentially blonde, sickly looking humanoids that can beam thoughts directly into people's heads to control us, and they understand how the universe's energy flows, which tracks with everything we hear about them so far. Pyrenees base located 1,500 foot below peak area. Landing ports are built on a cantilever extendable platform. When extended from the side of the mountain, it reaches around 125 foot and has a conveyor system. As soon as one lands, the conveyor transfers off pad so that another can land in a matter of seconds. I noticed another much larger recovery unit. It can extend out 376 foot. It's used for main transports, interplanetary. Several local units in launch recovery at this time. Note, I have to be alert not to make actions in this area. There are a number of Thetan traps, aka soul traps, in and about this area, mainly to detect the escape of new recruits all around the area within a 2-mile circle. Various detectors like heat sensors, magnetic field detectors, and special units. Yeah, lovely. So they sound like great people. The detection units are very thin metal sheets, graduated in size, smallest about 1 foot square, largest 10 foot square. The sheets are held under tension around the perimeters. An arm extends out above and below the metal sheet with an indicator finger not quite touching the metal. If the metal detects a vibration, it sets up a harmonic wave which causes the metal to contact the finger, which transmits electricity to the alarm system. Very interesting units. Okay, so what I think he's describing here is like a giant guitar string alarm system buried in or around the mountain. So like a vibration triggered alarm that is sensitive enough that a footstep vibrates the sheet, flexes it slightly, and then that creates a rippling harmonic wave which causes the metal to touch the finger, which then completes the electrical circuit and triggers an alarm. But I could be way off here. I am just a human trying to make sense of remote viewed 1970s alien tech, so I am trying my best. Pat then redirects himself back to the launch area and goes all in on a technical description of a UFO. It is far too much math and physics for me, and combined with the fact that he's in an altered state, it's not the most reader friendly portion of text in this document. So I did have to run it through AI for a bit more of a layman friendly summary, but I'll put the original on screen so that you can pause and read that if you want to. And he did do some sketches as well, so that's helpful. The ships are 120 foot wide, 120 foot tall discs, roughly the size of a 12-story building. From bottom to top, they're 40 feet high. The propulsion is an electromagnetic force field generated at the center from a 10-foot glowing metal globe, built from alternating sheets of metal and insulation wrapped around a central metal ring. Each metal layer is wired to a computer which connects to the main control panel. It reads Earth's natural magnetic field, then pushes back with an opposite field from far away, maybe another base or satellite, to levitate and steer. The outer hull is ultra thin, only 2.5 inches in total. It's built in 4 layers. 1. Outer skin, ultra thin metal. 2. Ablative shield, heat-proof coating bonded tight. 3. 1-inch gas layer, argon krypton mix, like a thermos to block heat/radiation. 4. Inner skin, just 1/8 of an inch thick, light but strong. So that's a UFO if you're thinking of building one, which AI tells me is not viable because I did ask. Something about needing gigawatts, inverse cube law, thrust vectors, and more terms that fried my brain, so do what you want with that blueprint. I noticed that personnel do not speak to communicate. Both male and female all do the same tasks. Oh, that's nice. So the aliens believe in gender equality, but they have no cause for concern about abducting and traumatizing us. How very progressive. Crew preparing for departure. No helmets, units are pressurized, no fear of skin rupture. They strap on an oversole right over their ankle length boots. Crew of 12, 3 are female. Mission: check monitoring units in their sector. Also monitor Skylab return. Alright, if you weren't around in the 1970s like me, you'd be forgiven for assuming that in the context of a document like this, that when you hear the word Skylab, your mind immediately assumes it's some interstellar hybrid breeding ship. But no, Skylab was in fact NASA's first space station and was apparently plastered all over the news at the time that Pat was conducting these viewings due to all sorts of launch drama, solar flare damage and astronaut repairs. And NASA always knew that this would eventually fall back to Earth, but the solar damage reduced that time frame considerably, and given that it was eventually going to rain down debris in Australia, which is one of where the aliens' bases is located, I can see why they might have been keeping an eye on it. Pat then shifts his focus over to our favourite high strangeness, snow-capped peak of the Americas, Mount Hayes. September 19th, 1973. Decided to look at location in Mount Hayes, Alaska, Wrangell Range. Same security measures at Mount Perdido. Area is now snow-covered, mountain is craggy, volcanic origin, launch recovery area in undercut of mountain. Activity inside is very relaxed. I see an area filled with what appears to be computer equipment. Instead of reels, equipment has metallic discs. There is a section filled with equipment that look like oscilloscopes. That's going to be a challenge for me. One is used to match wave patterns. Decided to follow leads on that word and find out where they lead. On top of peak is a small box-like structure, has antenna inside. Antenna is rotational. This links up to wave match oscilloscope? Why can't I say that? I usually can. Then other units take over and scan that wave pattern. They have a cabinet full of small compartments that have crystals of fixed frequency which are put in the oscilloscope. When new wave pattern is discovered, admin determines frequency, distance, power output, pulse, etc. Data fed to computer. Computer determines match or mismatch with all stored crystals. If match is found, the computer states known sources of that particular pattern. If mismatch, alert is sounded and are ordered to physically seek out source of power output and monitor, get data and return. Oscilloscope data creates new crystal and all known data is stored in computer for future use. All new patterns are investigated until enough data is secured to determine source and utility of new pattern. Alert is maintained until new source is determined to have negative potential on their own actions. If activity assumes any potential for discovery, personnel are deployed physically in order to make certain of failure of that particular project. It comes to mind that these people, and he puts that in quotation marks, have infiltrated all governments in sensitive positions, in positions of power to stop politically any activity that may produce a result that could cause discovery, particularly scientific fields, space fields, energy fields, church, education, and financial systems. Just determined that this site has been responsible for strange activity and malfunction on US-Soviet space projects. The computers at the site are fed all data acquisition from all space activity on Earth, US, Soviet, etc. Can cause false commands to space vehicles which result in unseen and unusual behaviour of vehicles and crew. Okay, so there's quite a lot to take in this session, and Pat is seeing some sort of crystal technology that's being used, which all sounds a little bit woo-woo on the surface, but what he's describing is really very similar to what we use crystals for in tech today. So what he's saying is, if a new signal is detected, the antenna grabs it, team measures the frequency, distance, power and pulse. The computer then checks against the other crystals that are storing the data, and if a match is found, say from something like NASA or the military, that's fine. If there's no match, then an alarm is triggered and it's basically game on. A crew is then physically deployed to hunt down the signal source, do a bit of casual spying, record it and return. Where it gets a little darker is that he notes that if something they detect could risk their exposure, they send agents to sabotage the project or to keep it quiet, and that they've been responsible for some of the malfunctioning or failures of US or Soviet space endeavours. It's quite interesting to see this. It was done in 1973 because this is a sentiment that is popping up more and more now, that maybe some of the stagnancy that we see in physics, space and the disclosure realm is not entirely by human design, and ultimately that is impossible to know, at least for now, but it is food for thought because some of the characters in these power structures of the world don't quite seem normal. 8 PM, 30th of September 1973. Decided to return to Hayes site. Activity very quiet. In fact, it's very relaxed. Going to look at Inyangani location. This base looks like overhaul and maintenance. I can see lots of spare equipment. Also, personnel don't appear to be quite as sharp as the other two units. They are doing some welding. Okay, so Inyangani is where they keep the tradies, which is nice to see that the aliens have class systems too. Looks different than what I've seen before. Parts being welded are put in a vacuum chamber with a window area, then part pre-fused. A greyish white powder is pasted onto both parts, then fused. While I was looking at the welding unit, my attention was drawn to a unit that several people are working on. It is a tubular grid system. Electrical connections are on opposite ends of tubes. Alternately welded across the top of the tubes is a unit that looks like a waveguide. I get the impression that the whole unit is for ionizing a layer of air. It has something to do with smog. Ionize a layer of air and it traps air mass below it. So we've got no date for this next session, but the timestamp says that it was received on October the 8th, 1973. Mount Ziel, standing in launch recovery area. I'm looking out over a great sandy desert. It's very interesting that this unit appears to have the greatest number of personnel. Frankly, I expected this site to have the least personnel, but there are personnel from the other 3 sites here, like a rest and recreation area. Note: felt slightly disorientated for a few moments. They may have detected me, so led them to Melbourne. There's a scientist there who is known to be very interested in the Great Sandy Desert and is preparing an expedition for a year's research. Locked them into him and the disorientation disappeared. What a savage move. And of course, I had to dig around and see if I could figure out who this could have been. And I think Harry Griesberg could be a good candidate for this. He lived and worked in Melbourne. He was an engineer and he was a UFO investigator. And in 1973, he wrote this in VUFORS, which stands for Victoria UFO Research Society Bulletin. The Great Sandy and Gibson Deserts hold key to anomalous energy readings, planning a full-year expedition to map sightings and probe sites. Poor guy. I mean, that is not someone who needs sabotaging aliens directly put on his tail. Decided to look at the Bermuda Triangle and determine the nature of the area. This is some good stuff. If you extend vector lines from each of the 4 locations and intersect them on the tip of Florida, you get 2 lines of the Bermuda Triangle. For great ages of time, the tip of Florida was the compass setting for trade routes and navigational computations for incoming immigrants from South America, Africa, and Europe. This made an ideal site for acquisition of physical data monitoring point. When it was decided that physical data of a general nature was desirable, the units went to this area and set up a magnetic electrical disturbance guided in whatever the target was, i.e. ship or a plane, used a tractor beam device to hold target, physically took personnel aboard, then disintegrated the vehicle and returned to their base. They do a preliminary data withdrawal from personnel, in brackets victims, then transfer them to their home for further study, mainly post-mortem. Some they did an operation on, heart or lung, and transported them alive. Basically, they use Homo sapien agents. The intended agent is taken in initially by thought induction, programmed as to their mission function, then a resonance vibration is set into them. This is the triggering device. When the agent receives subliminally the restimulation of that particular vibration, in brackets ultrasound, they key in and start relaying the acquired data and can also receive updated data. The answer to unwinding the puzzle is is to locate the exact frequency of the implant, reproduce it in the vicinity of the agent, then by thought transference, bleed off the data and then install new data. I mean, I'd never really assumed that whatever was going on within the Bermuda Triangle was anything remotely mundane or even benign, but good lord, I mean, this is dark. Pat's explanation is very harrowing. Now, it is a little bit Scientology coded, so I will try and summarize this now a little bit more simply, and so that we're all clear that in no uncertain terms, this is a no-go zone. So what he's telling us is that essentially the Bermuda Triangle is a big old trap. You can think of it like Asda for aliens, or Walmart if you're American, Kohl's if you're Australian. You get my drift. Basically, the product available on the shelves is humans. They create storms, yank ships and planes into it, beam the people aboard, autopsy them, or if you have the misfortune of surviving the open heart alien surgery, they'll take you to their home planet, program you to become a remote controlled spy with an ultrasound trigger, then return you to Earth as a data relaying sleeper cell. Now, on a more positive note, Pat does give us the antidote for deprogramming the surviving human agents, albeit with Scientology methods, but still, it's there if you want it. Our next session is from the 16th of October 1973, and it's stamped as received by H.E. Putoff on 18th of October, 7:10 p.m. Decided to take a look at some UFOs tonight. We're off to a good start. Located 3 just north of Huntsville right now. They are 68,000 feet, cruising on a head-in to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. They have a rendezvous at 10:15 Eastern Time with an agent that works in atomic energy plant in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Name, Roy Weaker, who has some newly obtained data on enriched material. Rendezvous on hill located 7 miles northwest of Oak Ridge and 6 miles due west of Clinton. There is a plateau on west side of Ridge, about 3 miles up Mountain Road. They are to meet there. Just one ship is going down, others to separate. Number 2 ship is going to Norfolk, Virginia and Photo Norfolk Navy Base, Portsmouth and Newport News. Number 3 is heading to Jacksonville, Florida. So far I can't pick up the intention of number 3. They are all to rendezvous over Nassau, Bahamas at 12 local time, then return to their home base. Their base is number 1, which I believe is Mount Perdido in the Pyrenees. Now, I couldn't locate a Roy Wheeler or anyone by a similar name that's connected with atomic energy, which doesn't mean entirely that this story is a lie, but assigning names in remote viewing is always very sketchy territory. 8:50 p.m. Took some time to watch the series. Numbers 2 and 3 are over Bermuda Triangle. Number 1 got some data on 3 projects. 1, Moonbeam. 2, Starlight. 3, Moondust. Picked up container with sample of material, some diagrams on mercury shielding, and plan to return to the same location next Monday night, 8:55 p.m. All 3 together now. Heading out over Atlantic, increasing altitude up to 200 feet, heading almost due east. There was some comment on flight regarding Pascagoula incident. In fact, some concern seems someone is playing a truth or some other unknown unit made the contact. They don't use the technique of altered concept implant, just use heavy memory shutdown procedure. It's entirely possible that incident may have been pulled off by crew from Green Planet. Alright, so another interesting thing to note here is that 2 of the 3 programs that Pat mentions are actually confirmed to be true. Project Moondust was a classified US Air Force project from 1953 to 1965, with documented extensions into the 1970s, tasked with recovering foreign space debris, including Soviet hardware and objects of an unknown origin, aka UFO crash materials. They deployed rapid response teams globally and often in coordination with Project Bluefly to secure items before public or adversary access. Declassified State Department and Air Force documents were released through FOIA in the 1990s, but in 1973, this was not public information. Now, Project Starlight was not a standalone program, but more of a classified reconnaissance technique developed under Project Sign and then Project Grudge, before later being integrated into Project Blue Book in 1952 to 1969. It used low light and then, in quotation marks, starlight optics, which were early night vision and infrared systems to track unidentified aerial phenomena during nighttime operations. Employed on aircraft and ground stations, it supported NORAD and CIA monitoring of high altitude anomalies. 1970s. References to Starlight appear in declassified Blue Book administration files and internal Air Force reports, but the name and technical details remain classified until 1970s to 1990s FOIA releases. But again, in 1973, it was not public knowledge. Now, Pat would have been given sensitive targets to view, and he would have had then some knowledge of a few classified projects, how much we don't know, but he was only a remote viewer and he had only been in the program just over a year at this point. So it's very unlikely that, given the level of compartmentalization that these types of operations adhere to, that Pat would have been informed about any of these projects, at least officially. Now, someone could have had loose lips, sure, or this could be the kind of example of what made Pat such a valuable remote viewer and such a threat, because it wouldn't be the first time that he'd psychically viewed and named highly classified information, and I have to wonder if this is actually another unacknowledged example of this. Alright, so I'm going to leave part 1 here because Pat's a man that likes his details and there's already been a hell of a lot of information to take in, so I think we'll save the home planet renegade breakaway aliens heading for the Earth bases for part 2. Now look, I won't lie to you, I am aware that this all sounds absolutely nuts, if not firmly in the territory of schizobabble. And the Scientology overtones in Pat's work definitely don't help either, but I just look at all of that the same way that I do an atheist or a Christian trying to conceptualize what they see. To one, it's an alien, to another, it's a devil. These are just perceptual filters depending on the program that you subscribe to. And underneath all of that, what he was recording in 1973 is the same narrative surrounding the phenomena that we hear today, 50 years later. I think one of the hard things to reconcile about all of this is Pat's purported accuracy record. Is this just an example where he had a catastrophic hard miss? Quite possibly. But he did go on to conduct many more verified sessions under strict conditions after this, which would ultimately lead to the CIA becoming so concerned that this man was just out there with the ability to see through walls, safes, and files into all of their dirty little classified secrets that they poached him for themselves. So for now, let's just keep an open mind, see what you think of part 2, drop a comment and let me know what you think of these sessions so far. There is a lot more to come from Pat in part 2. We have the renegade faction en route to Earth, names and places of the infiltration, weather manipulation, and Pat considering reaching out to the aliens directly himself. After all of that, we will take a look at the historical high strangeness connected to these 4 mountains and why I suspect that the bigger picture of why Pat did this is not what people would have you believe. See you next time.